I was sent a message on Instagram a while back on what to look for when buying a 303 SMLE. So let's jump down the rabbit hole and have a look at one. Most people when they're buying an SMLE are going to be buying a military version. Obviously mine is not a military version, mine is a sporterized rifle, but you will get the idea as we go through. What we'll do is we'll start from the muzzle and work our way back, and I'll talk about some features and what to look for when you're looking at buying an SMLE, so that way you can make a good purchase. Some gun shops may or may not let you pull certain parts of the rifle apart. Most will not let you pull anything apart. So these are some things you can look for without having to take tools in and rip things apart and do stuff that the gun shop otherwise won't let you do. So the first one we'll talk about is the crown of the muzzle. Right, so there we have the crown of the muzzle. And what you're looking for is you want to be able to see the lands and the grooves of the rifling. They want to look nice and sharp and not rounded over. Generally on a normal barrel, of this being a heavy barrel, it's slightly different, and it's been recrowned. But on a normal military barrel, you're going to have the edge profiles are rounded in towards, if that's the bore there, they're rounded in like that. You want to make sure that is nice and smooth and there's not more wear on one side than the other. That can occur when people clean the barrel from the muzzle end, which is why you should never do that. If it's a military rifle, it should have been cleared with the bore snake, which is what comes with the rifle, but you never know. Some people probably didn't know how to take the bolt out and they've run a rod in from the wrong end. While we're on the topic of the muzzle, if it is a military rifle you are looking at, you're going to want to have inside the end of the nose cap, and I'm going to try and find a photo on the internet that I can whack up for you. It's actually designed that the top of the barrel will contact the inside lip of that nose cap, and the reason for that is it's applying an appropriate amount of pressure to the muzzle, and I believe off the top of my head it's somewhere around the 7-pound mark, which doesn't really mean much to you because that's dictated by the spring that's within the nose cap that's pushing up on the bottom of the barrel about 2 inches back. What that will do though is make sure that the barrel is in the correct spot at all times and therefore will shoot accurately. If it's not touching, it means that probably either one, the spring in the little mechanism inside the nose cap is missing, or someone has tried to re-inlet that wood, so it should be touching. If it's not, maybe it's not a very accurate rifle. If it is a Lithgow, it should be serial numbered on the very end of the bayonet boss. I'm pretty sure that all of them were serial numbered. If it's not, it's probably not from a Lithgow SMLE, it may be an Ishapore. So that's something to look at. If you're looking for a serial numbers matching rifle, don't just look at the bolt and the receiver, look at the nose cap as well. There's a few other serial numbers that we'll talk about in a second. If you're looking at an SMLE number 1 Mark III, you will be looking for a stacking swivel on the nose cap. And if it doesn't have a stacking swivel, it should have the provision to take one, so that little bump down the bottom shouldn't be solid, it should have a hole through it. That is for the stacking swivel. If you're looking for a number 1 Mark III star, potentially you will have with the stacking swivel itself missing, or that will not have even been machined out, because that's what they started to do later and later into World War II when they made the change over to the Mark III star. One of the main things I always look at first when I look at the rifle is actually the rear side protector. If the flat side is facing forwards towards the muzzle, it is on backwards. The reason being is the dog leg that kicks out needs to be on the right-hand side of the rifle, because that is on the Mark III, is where the windage adjustment knob would normally be. Now obviously on the later ones, the Mark III Star, they remove that. So like this sight, this is a converted, so this is a number 1 Mark III converted to a Mark III Star. So it still has the, you probably can't really see that in the picture very well, it still has the windage adjustment markings. It just doesn't have the knob on it, which is on that side, because it has been ground off and then the end of that screw peened. So you could have that style. If you have a number 1 Mark III Star, then you would have no windage adjustment markings in there, and you would have a pin straight through, which would look like a screw head on top, but it's actually a pin. The rear sight is also serial numbered to the rifle, so if you flip it up, and on the bottom of the rear sight blade there will be a serial number. So if you're looking for serial numbers matching gun, make sure that matches the rest of your rifle. Otherwise your rifle's not serial numbers matching. Right, moving back to the Knox form. The Knox form is essentially just the barrel shank of a 303. This is going to give you some fairly pertinent information. Now, this is a heavy barrel, so it's marked with H on top of the Knox form. If you want to look at all the actual markings on a SMLE, go to the Lithgow Museum website. They have an actual printout, you can, like a PDF, will tell you all the markings for Lithgows, what year it was made, where it was made, like all that additional information you would want to have is in that PDF. So go and download that, because if you want to buy a 303, you should probably know what you're looking for. Let's just have a quick talk about heavy barrels, all right? Not every rifle that has a heavy barrel means it was a sniper rifle. In the interwar years between World War I and World War II, they started putting heavy barrels onto SMLEs for sporting competition rifles. Because if you take the wood off a normal barrel, they're so pencil thin that they tend to have a bit of whip in them when they fire, and you get really bad grips, which is why sporterizing a normal SMLE is a bad idea, and why generally, if it's a good sporter, or a properly gunsmith sporter, it should have a heavy barrel on it. On the Knox form, this one says MA61, which the camera's probably not going to be able to pick up, but it's right there, which means it was made in Lithgow. MA is the code word for, or the code letters for Lithgow factory, in 1961. So this barrel is obviously well after the war. This receiver's a 44, which tells me that Lithgow did sell these barrels by the bucket load, because they kept on churning them out because there's a lot of tooling for them. So a lot of gunsmiths were buying them and just putting them on new rifles and making sporters, you know, like this. So this is a 44 receiver. It's been rebarreled with a 1961 barrel. This barrel is actually in really, really good nick, and it shoots really well. Generally, on the barrel, this one doesn't have it because obviously it's made later, but generally behind the rear sight on the barrel, you're going to have HV for high velocity, which means the sights are for the Mark 7 ammunition, which has a slightly higher muzzle velocity than the Marks 1 through to 6. So keep an eye out for that. An Australian thing is 2 arrows with an S in between on the top of the receiver ring. That means sold out of service. There's a few other markings like sold out of service. There's sold out of service in a serviceable condition and sold out of service unserviceable condition, which means that essentially it was fucked and they sold it off. Yeah, so looking at those markings, as I said, download that PDF and you'll be right as rain there. Now, one thing to look at while we're talking about the Knox form and the front of the receiver ring is if it's been rebarreled by someone dodgy, sometimes you will be able to see the hashed pattern and the line pattern of a bench vise and a pipe wrench, which seems to be fucking quite common with amateur gunsmiths in the 50s and 60s. You see that a fair bit. So if you do see that, I would say err on the side of caution with your head spacing, because your head spacing could be out, which we'll talk about in a second. On top of both of these surfaces, you have a flat surface on the top of the receiver ring, you have a flat surface on the top of the Knox form. They should be parallel with one another. Now, an easy way to check that is to get 2 steel rulers, like the little machinist ones that are about this big, or anything that you know has a very straight line, and put them on top of each of those flat surfaces and look. Obviously, the longer it is, the better you can see that angle. If they're not sitting parallel, your barrel is not screwed to your receiver correctly, which means your headspace is more than likely out. That's just a quick reference you can do without obviously throwing a gauge through it. 303 gauges are becoming harder and harder to find. I can't even find a set at the moment, which is really annoying me. You can make something out of a fired case. You just need to have a pair of calipers and some sticky tape, and you would extend the rim by putting sticky tape layers on the back of it to make it the correct sizes, and you can use that as a makeshift headspace gauge. If you want to see how to do that, leave it in the comments, and I might do a video on how to make a headspace gauge. One thing I have heard a lot of, which is somewhat of a furphy, is, if your headspace is out, you just you take the bolt out and you rotate the bolt head. So let's have a look at that real quick. For those of you who don't know, the bolt head on a SMLE just screws off. So what they're claiming, so that's screwed all the way up, they're claiming that you just do one full rotation and then put it back in. Now, let's have a look on this rifle and see if it will still close if I leave it unscrewed like that. And no, it won't. Okay, because what we've done is we've extended the distance between the rear locking lugs, which are back here, and the chamber by a hell of a lot. By doing one whole rotation, you can see that gap in between the bolt body and the bolt head, which is, I've got a pair of calipers here, so I'm going to measure that. All right, so that gap is 0.056 of an inch. All right, so to make you understand how big that adjustment is a go gauge for 303 is 0.064, so that's your start point, and the no-go is 0.067. All right, so that's only 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths bigger. Yeah, whereas we've moved that from being 0 to 56 thousandths. Can you understand why doing that is not a good idea? If your gun can, if that does fix your problem, the problem is probably not your headspace, it's probably the fact that your whole receiver is now bent. A lot of old 303s, when they're real flogged out, do have a tendency, because they don't really have much metal on the top, to stretch, which means that the space between the face of the bolt and the locking lugs, obviously the bolt hasn't changed, one the receiver has because it's slightly bent, which means that your rifle is unserviceable and should not be fired. As a point of reference, headspace 0.064, sorry, go gauge 0.064, no go gauge 0.067, and a field gauge is 0.074. If your rifle can close on a field gauge, it is unserviceable. Do not fire that rifle. It is extremely unsafe because the maximum extreme for the headspace should be 0.067. Anyway, moving on from headspace. Another thing, what you can check in the store is a lot of people like to, play around with the bolt and fire it off and whatnot. So, obviously, your bolt should be slick. One thing that, for some reason, people don't understand this, it's cock on close, not cock on open, like most rifles you are going to encounter these days. A lot of the older style, like these, Mosin Nagants or whatever, even older Lithgow 22s, are all cock on close. So, normally on a modern rifle, or a Mauser style rifle, as you open that, that's it cocking the cocking piece. Now on this, if I just open and close it, nothing's going to happen, right? Because it needs to be cocked on close, which means you've got to push forward when you close the bolt. Now a lot of people are going to play with this and going to go, oh, it's really hard to get it forward, there must be something wrong with it. It's actually just because you're now compressing a spring, which is why when you cock the rifle, you should be using the ball into the palm of your hand like that. And it makes it a hell of a lot easier to do. That's why back in the day with a lot of, they used to bench rest shoot with shit like this. If you're trying to do this in your shoulder, it can get kind of hard, which is why the P14 was preferable, because the P14 was cock on open. Anyway, moving along to the next point, being the trigger. So in the gun shop, you're going to be allowed to play around with it. Make sure the bolt and everything cycles smoothly. Make sure the safety functions correctly, and we'll circle back to safety in a second. But when you go to fire the rifle, it should be in 2 stages, because it is a military 2-stage trigger. So by 2 stages, you should be able to squeeze slightly, and the trigger should move back freely until it hits a wall. And then once you're at the wall, you'll squeeze a little bit more and it will fire. This particular rifle has a single-stage trigger in it, so I will not be able to get the trigger to set back into its normal first wall. And you'll see that when I fire this now. Has a bit of creep and then it just breaks. This is because they have either changed the trigger. A lot of gunsmiths back in the day would file down the first hump on the 2 humps of the trigger. They can hone down the sear, or they can hone down the cocking piece at the back of the bolt. Either way, it means that something inside is either not functioning correctly or has been changed by someone previously, which means if you can tell that, who knows what else is going on inside that rifle, right? Because obviously you're not going to test fire at the gun shop before you take it, so that's one thing to look at. Make sure it's a 2-stage trigger and not a single-stage trigger. On the safety itself, there's 2 different styles, the older style and the newer style. This is the newer style. They went to just a flat piece of bar, or a flat piece of spring strap, whatever you want to call that. The older ones look a little bit more intricate, and I'll put a photo up now. And obviously make sure that your safety catch functions correctly. Wrist markings. So down on the receiver, under the bolt, you're going to have your wrist markings here. Make sure that corresponds with where your make, model, and year is. At the top, it's going to tell you where it's made. If it's a Lithgow, it will say MA, because I'm pretty sure they never made receivers anywhere that wasn't Lithgow. If it's not a Lithgow, it will have like Ishapore, BSA, RSA, Vizagli, fucking all those other places they made SMLEs. We'll say it at the top there. Now, this one obviously says MA and then Lithgow, so it's essentially saying Lithgow twice. SMLE, Mark III Star, and then 1944. Make sure that that number, the year, is matching up with all the other features, and do your research to make sure that it is all correct. Now, an interesting thing about Lithgow SMLEs, different from the British ones and the Ishapore ones, is they have a factory, not a serial number, but a manufacturing number, so where the bolt and the receiver will be numbered together before the serial number is assigned to the weapon. So if we take our bolt out, on the underside of the bolt handle, you'll have a number. So on the back of the bolt, that's the serial number. And under here, hang on, let me use a pointer. On the back of the bolt here, that's your serial number. And underneath, on this ledge, you have a manufacturer number. That is going to correspond with a number on the top of the receiver there. So the two numbers, when they're put in, will actually be facing each other. That's the manufacturer number. If you're looking for serial numbers matching, make sure that that number matches the receiver. You could have those numbers not matching, but the serial numbers matching, and that would mean that the bolt was replaced by an Army armourer, and they've changed the serial number. Generally, if they've changed the serial on the back there, they'd be crossed out, so it would have X punches over the top, and then next to it, or on the other side, it would have a new serial number punched in. Just something to look at if you're looking for a serial numbers matching gun. So, there you have it. That's what to look for in a nutshell on an SMLE, particularly a Lithgow SMLE. While I've got your attention about SMLEs, there are a lot of them going around these days for a hell of a lot of money, like $1,500 and above, and they're non-serial number matching. The wood doesn't match. You know, they've got parts on them that are mismatched, and it's just like people have just bought things from here and there to build a gun to sell. Now, things are only worth what people are willing to pay for them, and because people are fucking buying them, all of these piece of shit rifles are worth way more than they really ought to be. All right, so a non-serial number matching SMLE should really be more than, you know, $500, $500 to $1,000, depending on how good it is. But people are selling them for $1,500 and up because people are actually buying them. So do yourselves a favour and do the whole community a favour. And if it's not matching and it's not up to scratch, don't pay the money for one that is. All right. Well, I hope you got something out of that. I hope that was educational. If you want to see more content like that, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and I will see you next video. Hooroo.